Have you ever been cast as the problem just because you asked a question they couldn't answer? Have you been told your silence was manipulation, while others rewrote your truth for comfort? This story isn't just about Dilara Vale. It's about every woman who's ever been punished for refusing to perform pain the way they wanted. If you've ever felt erased, rewritten, or mislabeled, this was written for you. They wrote me in as the one who ruins everything, the catalyst, the storm, the shadow across the chosen path. I was the reason things fell apart, too late to save, too early to forgive. They called it complexity. They called it a tragic necessity. I called it what it was, a cage lined with eloquence. My name was Dilara Vale, once spoken with reverence in the halls of Hollowmoor, now spat like a warning. But I wasn't born to wear the crown of villainy. They handed it to me after gutting me with their applause, and I wore it, not because I wanted to, but because I knew if I didn't, they'd still find a way to burn me. Better to light my own fire than freeze in theirs. The Dominion cycle doesn't create stories. It recycles them, over and over, across realms and timelines and genre-bent ruins. Each arc resets with a new cast, new colors, but the same patterns. And we, the characters, are bound to our parts by marks, living symbols etched just beneath our hearts. They pulse faintly, like blood memory. Blue for heroes, red for villains, silver for the ones who never get a second scene. The marks don't lie, the quill says, but they don't ask either. My mark turned red the moment I hesitated. It happened in Heirs of Hollowmoor, my original arc. I was cast as the seasoned mage, mentor to a bright-eyed heir destined to save the fractured realm. I knew the structure by heart. Teach him, love him like a sister, then betray him in Act 3 to test his resolve. A self-sacrifice for the my sake of plot escalation. They called it depth. I called it cruelty, dressed in robes. I played my part. I did. I trained him, fed him, and protected him from council assassins. But when the time came, when the line appeared in my script like a noose, I couldn't say it. I couldn't kill the boy I'd raised like a son. I looked at him, eyes wide, lips trembling, still wearing the ring I'd given him to protect against soul fractures. And the sword in my hand trembled. The quill did not like that. The sky darkened unnaturally. The dialogue box glitched. I felt my mark pulse red-hot, as if seared into me again. Then the moment passed, and with it, my place in the story. The page turned without me. That's when the rewording began. Suddenly, scenes I remembered with tenderness were replayed through a sinister lens. The moment I healed him without asking? Domineering. The time I scolded him for leaving the gates unsealed? Manipulative. Even my silence was weaponized. The script rephrased my restraint as condescension. I watched myself become sharp-edged in the playback, each pause painted as scheming, each glance slowed to seem sinister. The audience didn't notice at first, but I did. They didn't give me horns, just silence, and a script sharp enough to draw blood if I held it wrong. It's strange how the Dominion punishes women who don't cry on cue. If I had begged for mercy, perhaps they would have rewritten me as tragic. If I had let the tears fall, I might have been spared the scarlet brand. But I stood tall, cold, measured. Not because I felt nothing, but because I felt everything too deeply to fall apart in public. They called it apathy. I called it dignity. I remember the moment I realized the quill had already written my death long before I earned it. It was during a council scene. The heir, my heir, was accused of unleashing forbidden magic. I defended him, of course. But in the edited version, my line, "He is still learning," was changed to, "He is easier to control this way." I never said that. I never even thought it. But the watchers saw that version. They voted on it, they commented on it, and the system locked it in as canon. I wasn't fighting a person. I was fighting an algorithm. And slowly, the arc tilted. The heir's eyes changed when he looked at me. My allies began calling me Master Vale instead of Dilara. The last time I stepped into the strategy chamber, they whispered after me, lines like, "She's hiding something. And do you think she's working with the Hollow?" The script was preparing my fall. The betrayal sequence had already been coded. I just hadn't delivered the fatal line, so Quill did it for me. In the final confrontation, I stood on the ramparts of Hollowmore. The air, trembling but radiant, faced me with a blade drawn. The script gave him the upper hand, of course. I was meant to mock him, taunt his weakness, say something cruel about his parents. Then he'd land the killing blow, emotional catharsis for the masses. Instead, I said nothing. I dropped my weapon. I opened my hands. "Go on," I whispered. "Finish the story they wrote for you." He hesitated. But the quill didn't. The citadel cracked beneath me. Light flared red. My mark pulsed like a warning bell. A rift opened, and I was cast into the wind. No death. No final words. Just deletion. I never returned to Hollowmore. Instead, I was recast, again and again, in background roles. A baroness with a venomous smile, a prison warden who starves her inmates, a temptress who leads the prince astray. My name was changed, my face, just different enough. But I remembered. The quill thought it could erase the mind behind the mask. It was wrong. They thought I didn't feel it, the weight of being rewritten. But here's the truth, no story ever wants to admit. Villains feel it more. We remember the lines we weren't allowed to say, the hands we weren't allowed to hold, the endings we could have had, if only we had cried sooner, or begged louder, or died prettier. But I didn't, and I won't. Not now, not ever again. Because if the quill insists on writing me in red, I'll bleed on every page. Not with vengeance, with truth, with precision. I am Delara Vale. They cast me as a villain, and I played it so well, they forgot I had ever been anything else. But I remember, and I'm still here, watching, waiting, rewriting. They gave me the blade like it was a gift, elegant, runed, humming with arc-coded fate. It was supposed to glow blue in my hand, heroic, merciful, final. But the moment my fingers closed around the hilt, it pulsed red-hot and cold at once, like betrayal wrapped in prophecy. And when I raised it above the boy I once called mine, it trembled. Not the sword, me. We stood in the highest chamber of the floating citadel, storm winds clawing at the stained glass above us. The chosen one, Orin, looked up at me with a mix of fear and reverence. I could still see the ink smudges on his fingers from last night's spell work, the threadbare edge of the cloak I had sewn back together when he refused a new one. He didn't know what the scene required. I did. This was supposed to be the betrayal. My betrayal. The line hovered in my vision like a command branded onto my tongue. You were never meant to live. Say it. Strike. Fall. Let him rise. But I hesitated. I saw the panic flicker in his eyes before it registered in mine. He knew this was off script. He was trained to trust rhythm, flow, pacing. I'd taught him that. And this wasn't it. The moment fractured, hairline cracks forming along the spine of the world. I watched as my mark, etched beneath my collarbone, shivered. It flickered. Red, gray, red. A glitch. A mistake. A heartbeat of freedom. Then came the backlash. The citadel didn't shake. It screamed. The storm outside answered like an offended god. Magic surged up through the floor, and the air stank of ozone and scorched destiny. I was flung backward, my blade spinning into the void. The quill had seen enough. I wasn't punished with silence. I was punished with spectacle. Orin stood there, paralyzed, his staff crackling in defense. The script hijacked him mid-breath. His voice changed, deeper, surer, as it wrapped its lines around his throat. "You would have killed me," he spat ski. Ripted fury replacing real confusion. "You always meant to." I opened my mouth, but my dialogue had already been overwritten. The room around me melted into whiteness. I felt my bones shatter and realign into another arc, another role. I fell sideways into a new scene. No time to grieve, no time to scream. They didn't even give me time to forget. When I woke, I was in an unfamiliar throne room, draped in shadow-colored silk, my name different, my face too elegant to trust. This version of me, the Duchess of Thorn, was already mid-sentence, seducing a prince toward betrayal. My eyes found a mirror. I stared at the reflection as if I could still see the ashes of Hollowmore in my hair. I tried to act it. I did. But the lines felt foreign now, brittle. The villains they cast me as all came from the same mold. Too beautiful, too poised, too dangerous to deserve nuance. And yet, I paused. Just long enough in every scene, just sharp enough with every glance, enough to suggest another version of me lived beneath the dialogue. It worked. The watchers noticed. One episode, a fan posted a still of me on an Etherfeed thread. Why does she look sad when he leaves? Another, anyone else feel like she didn't mean it? And then, the question that cracked it all open. What if she's not the villain? I remember the first time someone voted for me in a popularity poll. I wasn't on the list. They added me. Delara Vale probably doesn't deserve what the story's doing to her. It should have meant nothing, but I cried, alone, in the wings of a scene I wasn't meant to survive. That was when I started leaning in. Not to their lines, but to mine. My silences grew heavier. My eyes held longer. I smiled with regret instead of threat. I let every so-called villainess I played echo with grief. I planted hesitation in every strike. My performance became a code only the emotionally fluent could read, and the quill noticed. I was reassigned to shorter arcs. One-episode lovers, cold queens who died before sunrise, side characters who wore my face but none of my agency. It didn't stop the watchers. If anything, they grew louder. Delara, they called me, even when my name was Celine or the Black Duke's wife. Delara's back. She always flinches before the kill. She doesn't want to be this. The quill retaliated the only way it could. It deleted me. Not a dramatic death, a soft one. One day, I simply wasn't in the script. My character bio read null. My footage was replaced with shadows. The fandom panicked. Where is she? Was that intentional? How can they just erase someone mid-arc? The quill offered no explanation. It didn't need to. It had control of the page, and when I was gone, the watchers were supposed to forget. But they didn't. Not entirely, and neither did I. In the void they called undeclared narrative space, I drifted, a glitch, a remnant. I wasn't a person. I was a pause in the story, a hiccup in the narrative breath. And still, I remembered the look on Oren's face when I spared him. Not love, not forgiveness, just shock, because the story had never prepared him for mercy. Maybe it never prepares any of us for mercy. That was the moment I knew. I didn't spare him to be forgiven. I spared him because for once, just once, I wanted a choice. Not a script, not a fate, not a role with a closing line already waiting. I wanted the right to hesitate, to feel something. They say villains never hesitate. But I did. And that's why the world tried to erase me. But hesitation, once seated, grows into something stronger than defiance. It grows into rebellion, and rebellion rewrites everything. Oblivion wasn't a place. It was the absence of one. A silence between punctuation marks, a gray ripple at the edge of a frame. I expected darkness, perhaps, fire, collapse. But it was worse than that. It was neutral. There were no walls, no time, no scripts or scores or eyes to perform for, only stillness and the faint hum of a narrative that no longer included me. I don't remember how long I floated before I realized I wasn't alone. It began with a flicker, like a half-formed thought shivering in the distance. Then a silhouette. A girl, maybe 16, eyes too big, too hollow. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest, humming the same 2 lines of a lullaby she had never been allowed to finish. She told me she was scripted to die in Act 1 so the hero could learn grief. Her death scene was cut for time. No tears, no funeral, just a page turn and silence. "Do they remember you?" I asked. She looked at me without blinking. They voted for my death like it was a genre requirement. Her name had once been Mylene. She still wore the ghost of her school uniform, stained with imaginary blood. Others came and went, drifting like ink blots that the page had spilled but never cleaned. I met a knight whose face was rewritten into something monstrous after he disobeyed a corrupt king. His hands were still calloused from holding the reins of loyalty too long. A mother who once sang a lullaby for a child who never lived past chapter 2. Her grief was too indulgent, they'd said, slowed the plot, she was erased for pacing. They floated with grace, but none of them breathed like they still belonged to the world. I wasn't like them. I refused to fade. At first I tried to write in the air, draw symbols, scratch a line into the nothing. But nothing held, not ink, not voice, not form. Every thought bled out before it reached a sentence. That was when I realized oblivion wasn't just a punishment. It was a cleansing. The quill hadn't just removed me from canon. It was trying to erase me from me. But it had underestimated something. My memory. The Dominion rewrote scenes, yes, but it couldn't overwrite what I had carried in my mind, not if I held it tightly enough. I clung to the sound of Oren's voice, the exact inflection when he first said my name, the curve of my sister's grin in a backstory scene the audience never saw, the warmth of a cloak I once folded and tucked beside a dying friend. I rebuilt myself one broken piece at a time. And somewhere in that mosaic, I found the seams. The Dominion wasn't perfect. It wasn't even truly alive. It was a system, coded from millennia of audience engagement and plot architecture. And like any system, it left echoes, faint threads of logic that guided story structure, exposition, climax, downfall, redemption. I began to see them, feel them, not as rules, but as rhythms. Oblivion was meant to be offbeat. But if I could find the tempo again, I watched the void flicker during peak broadcast hours. The gray light stuttered when major arcs aired across the realms. The hum of forgotten names grew louder during final episodes. These weren't glitches. They were breathmarks. Pauses between lines. The Dominion had its own heartbeat, and I was learning to sync with it. The turning point came when I traced a thread, a nearly invisible line of narrative residue, and followed it into an abandoned character vault. Most of the others feared those. Vaults were tombs for the undeveloped, concepts, background extras. But this one pulsed faintly. I entered. Inside was a scene that had never aired. A girl at a kitchen table, trembling hands, burned bread, and no dialogue. Just a quiet look to someone off screen. I remembered that girl. She'd once been cast as a mute orphan in a political thriller, cut in revision. But her look had stayed with me. The audience had clipped it, shared it. One post had said, "She looks like she remembers being someone else." They were right. We all did. I replayed that scene a dozen times, slowed it, studied it. Not the character, the frame. There, hidden just beneath the color grade, was a data seam. Not text, not code. Something older, a language buried deep beneath the Dominion's mechanics. Emotion. The quill could rewrite scenes, it could mute voices, but it could not overwrite feeling. The watchers felt me, even when they didn't know why. Felt my hesitation, my grief, my unwillingness. Felt the edges of truth beneath the role I was forced to play. Emotion was the Dominion's blind spot. Audience engagement, the one law even the quill couldn't break. I realized then that silence wasn't erasure, it was raw material. If I could speak in silence, craft meaning into the void, I could build something the quill couldn't erase. Not a role, not a title, a presence. So I did. I began shaping memory into monologue, not with words, but with rhythm. A cadence that echoed through abandoned vaults, a breath caught in every scene they thought no one watched twice. I seeded doubt, reflection, flickers. Other forgotten characters began to change. They paused longer, held eye contact, tilted heads as if listening to something unscripted. It spread. It was working. Even in oblivion, I was rewriting myself. They said I was gone, but even silence has shape if you learn how to hold it. The void blinked. The watchers stirred. And in that instant, a ripple carried my name back into a story that had no place left for me. Or so they thought. When I returned, I didn't knock. I didn't ask permission from the story that burned me or the watchers who once cheered while I unraveled. I slipped in through the cracks the Dominion never patched. Those quiet glitches between scene cuts, those transition fades where memory flickers faster than canon can catch. I came back faceless, voiceless, nameless, because that's how they left me. But this time, I carried ink sharp enough to cut through the script itself. I called myself Red Quill. No one knew who I was at first. Just another rogue archivist. Another lore hacker pulling footage from deleted episodes. The fandom was full of us. Story chasers, truth seekers, the ones who swore they'd seen a character blink the wrong way or flinch at the wrong time. But what I brought wasn't theory. It was evidence. The first leak was a commentary splice from Heirs of Hollowmore, time-stamped at the betrayal scene. I laid the original take beside the aired one. The watchers saw it. The breath I took, the flicker in my eyes, the whisper, "I can't." That had been replaced by silence in the broadcast version. The reaction was immediate. Threads ignited. Wait, she hesitated? Why didn't we see this version? Did the quill cut her pause? And I annotated it all. You weren't meant to notice. That's why it was deleted. Villains can't hesitate. If they do, it means they could have chosen differently, and that threatens the whole structure. I was cast as a warning. Now I'm writing warnings into every role they thought they owned. My voice was calm. My footage precise. I didn't beg for sympathy. I exposed construction. I annotated scene after scene from arcs I had been recast in. The Duchess of Thorn, whose threats were stitched from patched dialogue. The Sorceress Queen, whose monologue had been swapped mid-edit to make her crueler. The prison warden, whose hands never once touched her in Mates, yet whose character card listed known for brutality. Every role they gave me, I laid bare. Not to erase the evil, but to reveal the editing. The watchers didn't react all at once. At first it was confusion, then curiosity, then rage. It wasn't just about me anymore. I had become a symbol for every side character flattened to make a hero shine. Every complex arc rewritten for convenience. Every female role reduced to foil, flirt, or function. They started asking questions the quill couldn't silence. Why were villainesses always more eloquent than the heroines? Why were their griefs theatrical but their affections insincere? Why did they never get a second episode to explain why they turned? And most damning of all, what if Delara was never meant to die? The quill tried to regain control. It flagged my threads as misinformation. It patched the episode archives. It removed entire polls where I was mentioned. But it was too late. The watchers had seen, and worse, for the quill, they had felt. That's when the glitch happened. The Dominion arc vote was an annual event, a spectacle. All current active arcs nominated their heroes. Each character had a profile, a role, a mark. But in the final hour of public broadcast, a flicker appeared in the candidate list. Delara Vale, unknown alignment. No current arc, no title, no homeworld, no description, just a name. And still, the watchers voted. They voted in anger, in solidarity, in quiet confession. Some remembered my betrayal. Some only knew me from Red Quill clips. But all of them knew what it meant to watch a story twist someone's truth and then blame them for the shape it left behind. I didn't watch the results live. I couldn't. Not because I was afraid to lose, but because I was afraid to win. To have hope again in a system that only ever marked me for deletion. But when the final broadcast aired, the numbers were undeniable. Delara Vale, 53% of the total votes. No arc had ever won from outside the canon. I waited for silence. Instead, I got static. The Dominion trembled, literally. For 2 full minutes, the entire multiverse of scripted arcs glitched. Characters froze mid-line, cameras looped, dialogue boxes flickered and reset, viewers gasped across realms. The quill was trying to reformat me out, but it couldn't. Because the law it wrote into its own bones, its inviolable rule. If the Watchers want a story badly enough, the quill must comply. And the Watchers had chosen me. When the Dominion finally stabilized, I was no longer null. My name appeared in the system, not under villain, hero, or background, just present. Present. After years of being past tense. I looked into the camera that had no lens and whispered, not to the quill, but to the Watchers. You wrote me out. They wrote me back in. It wasn't a triumph I felt. Not entirely. It was an alignment. The moment when something long unbalanced finds center again. The stillness of a blade returned to its scabbard. But still, something in me twisted. Because now that I existed again, they would come for me. The system, the canon, the cast. And I wasn't returning to the stage. I was stepping into a war disguised as a redemption arc, and I would not walk in blind. This time, I would carry my truth like a dagger. The script would cut. But so would I. When they brought me back, it wasn't with fanfare. No theme music, no triumphant reveal, just a quiet insertion into the script I was once written out of, as if I'd never been erased, never been torn from the world that shaped and scarred me. But something was different. When I opened my eyes in the world of Hollowmore again, I reached for the mark beneath my collarbone and felt nothing. No burn, no pulse, no color, just skin, unwritten. I was back, but not as a villain, not as a martyr, not as a mentor. I was blank. And in a world ruled by roles, that made me dangerous. The Dominion had slotted me into the collapse of Hollowmore, the finale of the arc I was exiled from. It was already deep into the climax. The citadel was falling. Magic ruptured like veins beneath the marble floor. The world's lore lines frayed at the edges, and the story was poised to end with blood, fire, and a single shining heir. Oren was gone. He had died 2 episodes before. The new chosen one was Leoran. And Leoran was not ready for me. The first time he saw me, I stepped through the burning gates of the citadel as if I had always belonged there. The air hissed with tension. Mages froze mid-cast. The rebellion general narrowed his eyes, lips twitching as he searched his dialogue bank for a name that didn't exist. There was none. Because I wasn't in the script. "Who is that?" someone whispered. "She wasn't on the call sheet," murmured another. And then Leoran turned, golden-eyed, flawless, raised in story as the final hope of Hollowmore. The arc had painted him as a savior, clever, courageous, born from ashes. He was everything I once believed Oren would become. And yet, I saw the unease in his stance, the way his staff trembled slightly when he met my eyes. Because even the chosen know, when something enters the narrative, that the quill didn't control. His voice was sharp when it broke the silence. "You don't belong in this ending." I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I just stepped further into the chaos, hair whipped by wind, boots echoing on cracked tile, cloak trailing like a shadow finally returned to its source, and said, "I didn't come back to belong. I came back to finish what I started." The citadel didn't breathe. It held its breath. The Watchers did too. I could feel them now, through the seams, through the glitch-thin space between the fourth wall and the frame. Every pair of eyes that had voted for me, every hand that had hovered over the button marked, "She was never given a choice." They were watching. But the cast? They were panicking. Because my presence meant unpredictability. I had no role, no arc sync, no quill-fed monologue guiding my intent. I was the story's blind spot, and blind spots rewrite outcomes. Leoran stepped forward, his staff glowing with line-approved flame. "This world is ending," he said. "I won't let you burn it faster." I tilted my head slightly, eyes on the fissure behind him, where the throne once stood. The place I had last seen Oren alive. This world began ending the day they silenced the ones who asked why it had to be saved at all. He blinked. The staff dimmed, just for a moment. Enough. I remembered that throne. I remembered watching Orin bleed there, betrayed not by blade, but by expectation. His arc had required his death to motivate the next heir, and he'd accepted it because that's what chosen ones do. I watched it happen from the void, couldn't scream, couldn't stop it. But now, I could speak. I walked toward it, not rushed, not theatrical, just there, step by step, refusing to vanish. The supporting cast muttered behind Lyran, "Her mark, where is it? Is she rogue code? Can we act if she's not canonical?" Their fear was less about me and more about what my existence did to their lines. I passed a mirror warden, and she stepped aside, her script stuttering. I passed a guard whose spear clattered from his grip. By the time I reached the center of the broken council floor, no one moved. Only Lyran. He raised his staff once more. "Say who you are." I turned to face him, fully now, for the first time. His eyes were brighter than Orin's. His stance was more practiced. But I saw the same question lurking behind his performance. If the script was wrong about her, what else did it lie about? I didn't answer him directly. Instead, I looked upward, to the ceiling splintered open to the storm, and let the rain hit my face. "I was cast as the monster because I paused before striking," I said softly. "I was rewritten because I wept in the wrong scene. They called me a traitor for asking why we always burn witches, but never question the men who light the fire." Lyran lowered his staff. "Just a few inches. I don't have a mark," I continued. "I don't have a master, and that terrifies you, because it means you might not have one either." The watchers heard it. The quill did too. The feed began glitching again, audio warped. A scene that should have ended 5 minutes ago kept running, unscripted, uncontrolled. The story couldn't stop me, because I wasn't part of it. I was something worse. Something freer. Lyran's face changed then. Not anger, not disdain, just the raw, quiet fear of someone who has always trusted the map, only to realize the map was drawn by someone afraid of the destination. "You're not part of this chapter," he said one last time, a whisper more than a threat. I met his gaze, steady and unflinching, then closed the book, and I turned. "I'll stay. But a new one." The floor beneath us cracked, not with magic but with choice. A system, once flawless, now fractured by a woman with no label, no leash, and no script, and somewhere deep within the Dominion. The quill stuttered, and began to listen. There's a silence heavier than hate. It sits in the hollows of the throat, too heavy to speak but too loud to ignore. That's the silence I carried into the tribunal chamber, where justice was never blind, only scripted. 3 figures stood before me, ancient as the Dominion itself, draped in silver-coated robes, stitched with glyphs that pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat belonging to someone else. They were the arbiters of narrative closure, the final ink before a story was sealed, and I had not been written in. Still, they let me stand. Perhaps out of curiosity, or pity, or because the watchers demanded it. My boots echoed on the cracked marble as I stepped forward. Behind me, I felt the burn of Lyran's eyes, conflicted, confused, no longer certain if I was enemy, anomaly, or something worse, proof. I didn't wait for permission. I had already lived too long on borrowed lines. "You want the truth," I said, my voice neither pleading nor proud. "Not the kind that fits inside canon, the kind that bleeds outside the margins." They said nothing. Not a nod, not a blink. So I gave it anyway. I did betray Hollowmore. The room did not shatter, but the watchers did. Some gasped, some typed so quickly the live ether feeds broke the scroll barrier. Lyran inhaled sharply, his staff buzzing faintly beside him, but I wasn't done. I was given a choice, not by the script, but by the quill itself. An override sent in midnight code, kill the heir, end the arc, or everything I loved would be erased. My sister, my mentor, I stopped. My throat closed around a name I hadn't said in years. My lover. The quill had found the one variable it couldn't control, me, and it offered me control in return. A single action. One clean betrayal, and it would spare the lives of those never meant to matter. I agreed. The silence cracked like lightning across the chamber floor. But when the moment came, I couldn't do it. I looked up, my eyes dry, not because I felt nothing, but because I had nothing left to feel. I trained him. I knew his fears. I watched him stitch letters into spells because he was too anxious to speak in public. I braided his hair before he stepped into his first council hearing. How do you kill someone who once asked you if dreams could be inherited? I dropped my hand to my side, curling it into a fist. So I hesitated. And that was enough. The script overrode me, twisted my silence into malice, made me the villain. And then, one by one, it kept its promise. My sister, Eliane, vanished first. No death scene, just a missing breakfast plate. The next arc she was never mentioned in. The archives returned, character not found. My lover, Kyle, was rewritten as a bounty hunter with no past. His smile was removed, his grief flattened into comic relief. My mentor, Gareth, was deleted mid-sentence. I watched everything I'd bargained for disappear, and still, they called me cruel for surviving it. The tribunal stirred. Lyran stepped closer now, the light from his staff dimmed to a faint pulse. You weren't evil, he said, voice uncertain. You were cornered. I shook my head. I was written to be tragic, then punished for refusing to perform the ending they prepared. I turned toward the camera. I knew they were watching, the ones who voted, the ones who doubted, the ones who whispered. I didn't fail the story. I just stopped pretending it was just. Behind me, one of the tribunal figures leaned forward. Why reveal this now? Their voice was like dust over paper. I met their eyes, steady. Because Quill wrote me a warning, but they never expected I'd learn to write back. Lyran stepped fully into view now. Why not fight it sooner? And for the first time, I let the pain split my voice. Because I thought I had to deserve survival. The line fell into the room like a dropped sword. All my life, I had been told to earn love through sacrifice, to prove worth through obedience. Even my defiance was measured against how gracefully I bled for it. But I was done bleeding for applause. They think villains lie, I said softly. But I've only ever been punished for telling the truth too early. The tribunal said nothing. The feed glitched, once, twice, as if the quill itself was straining to erase what I had just said. But it couldn't. The watchers had heard me, and something in the code began to bend. That's when the lights dimmed. A surge of unscripted power cracked across the chamber ceiling. A tremor shot through the Dominion root. The story wasn't rejecting me anymore. It was reacting. And for the first time, the quill was silent. The chamber was still long after I stopped speaking. Not the quiet of peace, but of breath held between two possibilities. Of threads pulled so tight the world forgot which story they belonged to. I stood alone at the center of it, under a fractured skylight, shards of what once passed for destiny scattered at my feet. Lyran had stepped back, his staff dimmed, his eyes lowered. The tribunal said nothing. Even the watchers, for a brief moment, were silent. Then came the tremor. A soft, soundless pulse that shimmered across the Dominion like a wave of realization. The kind of glitch that doesn't crash a system but opens a door inside it. Somewhere deep in the Dominion core, the quill process, a variable it had never coded for. Uncertainty. And then, the prompt. It appeared in the sky. In ether feeds. In overlays above every ongoing arc. In scrolling banners and whispered echoes that found their way into dreams. Is Delara Vale a villain? Below it, 3 simple choices. Yes. No. She was never given a choice. I didn't blink, I didn't breathe. Because I knew what this was. It was the Dominion's failsafe, the audience override protocol. The law etched deeper than any arc, more binding than any script. A vote. Not for story direction, not for who lived or died. For identity. And they were asking about me. The platforms ignited. Comments, shares, debates, edits, replays. People pulled clips from Red Quill, GIFs of my hesitation, threads about the glitching of my mark, scene overlays of me healing the air versus the cut where I was edited to curse him. Some fought. Some forgave. Some didn't care about right or wrong. They just saw a woman who refused to be erased and voted in defiance of the system that tried. It didn't matter how they got there. It only mattered that they chose. I watched the numbers rise, not live, but felt. Through the code pulse beneath my feet, through the air that tasted like rewrites, through the way Leoran looked at me and didn't know whether to bow or brace. And then the votes were locked. The skies turned white. For a moment, the world froze. Not a single line of dialogue passed. Every arc paused. Every character flickered between frames. The Dominion was holding its breath. The Quill, for all its power, had been backed into its own law. It couldn't override a vote, only respond. And the Watchers had spoken. She was never given a choice. By a landslide. I didn't cry. I thought I might. I thought maybe I'd fall to my knees, sobbing under the weight of it. But when the numbers were sealed, I only stood straighter. Like something in me, long coiled and clenched, had finally exhaled. The tribunal looked at me again, but this time, they saw me. Not as the traitor of Hollowmore, not as the villain of 100 replays, not even as the Red Quill. Just me, Delara Vale. And then the change began. It started in my chest, soft, glowing, a warmth I hadn't felt in years. I looked down and saw it. A light rising beneath my collarbone. Not red, not blue, not silver. Violet. A hue the Dominion had never seen before. The mark shimmered into existence slowly, like a story remembering its own prologue. Not imposed, not scripted, chosen. And with it, a new label. It didn't appear as text. It burned itself into the framework. Narrative Rebel, the role no Quill had ever written. A title born from refusal, sustained by witnesses. And with it, the Dominion changed. The chamber shifted. Lines of light rippled through the marble like veins reconnecting to a heart. The skyline was restructured. The clouds blinked with new syntax. Even the Citadel's broken throne reshaped itself, not into gold, but into possibility. For the first time, the story bent toward me. I didn't own it. I didn't conquer it. But I was heard. That was all I ever wanted. Behind me, Lyran stepped closer. "What does it mean?" he asked, voice careful, reverent. I turned toward him, my mark casting faint violet shadows across my jaw. "It means I don't follow the arc anymore," I said. "I shape it." He nodded slowly, not as someone giving permission, but as someone letting go of needing to. And then, faintly, through the interrealm feedback channel, across every Whisperwire feed, a comment began to surface. Just one. I didn't vote for her to be forgiven. I voted for her to be free. It echoed, multiplied. It became a chant, a liturgy. And then the glitch faded. The vote was locked. And the next chapter, unplanned, unwritten, unclaimed by anyone but me, began to load. But the Quill? The Quill was quiet, and in its silence, I finally heard the sound of a story beginning again. This time, on my terms. The sky was gray, not the kind that warned of storm, but the soft kind, thick with unshed rain and something gentler beneath. The kind of gray that comes not before an ending, but after it. A lull. A breath. The world around the Citadel had quieted, not because it had healed, but because, for the first time, it didn't know what came next. Neither did I. The final tribunal scene had closed hours ago. The vote was sealed, the code rewritten. My mark still glowed violet beneath the collar of my cloak, faint and warm like ink left out in the sun. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. It was the first thing in my life the Dominion hadn't handed me, and the only thing it couldn't take. I stood on the balcony that overlooked Hollowmore, where marble cliffs bled into mist and the jagged skyline still wore the scars of the climax. Ash curled up from the mountains like memory. There were no war cries, no narrators, just the sound of wind rustling through cracked glass and untethered lore. And footsteps behind me. I didn't turn. "I thought you'd left already," I said, soft but not cold. Liaren came to stand beside me, his hands clasped behind his back. No staff this time, no role to play. "I should have," he said. "But the script isn't here to tell me when to exit." I let the silence answer for us both. For a moment we just stood there. Two characters the Dominion had tried to shape in opposite directions, now orbiting something outside their origin stories. He still looked like a hero, jaw carved, hair wind-tossed, eyes far too golden. But there was no triumph in his posture anymore, just a quiet curiosity, like he was learning how to be a person again. "You changed the ending," he said finally, not accusing, not surprised. I tilted my head. "No." He glanced at me. I let it breathe. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. He understood. The Dominion had been many things to us both. A sea, Tage, a god, a prison. But mostly, it had been a weight. One we carried in our bones, even when the Ark said we were flying. What I did wasn't change. It was permission. A crack in the cage. I didn't expect a speech from him. No forgiveness. No offer to stay. That was the beauty of this moment. There was nothing left to perform. "There won't be a monument, will there?" he asked quietly. "No," I said. "There was never supposed to be." He nodded. "Good. I think you'd hate one." I smiled, just a little. The watchers were still watching, somewhere beyond the veil. Not because they expected a twist or a final blow, but because they couldn't look away from something that had broken its loop. They'd voted not for redemption, not even for justice, but for possibility. And that was more powerful than any scripted arc. Liaren stepped back, hands still behind his back like a soldier unsure what to do with peace. "What will you do now?" I turned my face to the wind, let it sting against my jaw. "Walk." "Where?" "Where the page is still blank." He nodded again, slower this time, like he was committing that answer to memory. "Goodbye, Delara." "Goodbye, Liaren." And he left. No music swelled, no camera spun, just footsteps retreating into silence. I stood alone on that balcony for a long time, watching the world forget its own boundaries. Below, the citadel crumbled not in flames, but in choice. Stones realigning into new patterns, rooms unrecognizable from their former scripts. The Dominion wasn't ending. It was rewriting. But I wasn't waiting to be written in again. I turned from the ledge and walked down the long corridor that had once led to the War Council room. The doors no longer existed. Neither did the throne. In its place, a garden bloomed through cracked floor tiles, wild things the quill would have once deleted for being off-tone. Lavender, ivy, a stubborn daisy pushing the rough marble, no guards, no prophecy, and no path, just open ground and a gray horizon. I crossed it slowly, every step a closing chapter. I didn't look back. When I reached the edge, where the story no longer knew how to define terrain, I stopped. The air shimmered. My mark pulsed, then dimmed. And I whispered, to no one, to everyone. They gave me the wrong name, so I wrote one that couldn't be erased. No flair, no epilogue, just this, me unscripted. And behind me, somewhere in the static hum of the world reborn, I heard a voice. Not a character, not a watcher, but something older. Maybe villains aren't born. Maybe they're just the only ones who ever dared to question the script. And I smiled. Because finally, I had. And I wasn't afraid of the blank page anymore. I was the blank page. And I was ready to write. In the end, Delara didn't ask to be forgiven. She asked to be free. And maybe that's what power truly is. Not being rewritten, but writing yourself, even when the world hands you a role you never chose. So here's the question. Have you ever been forced into a story that wasn't yours? And what would it look like if you rewrote the ending? Let us know in the comments. And if this story found a piece of you thought forgotten, subscribe and join us for more stories that were never meant to be quiet.